this is John Kohler with OKRaw.com, and today we're going to talk about one of my favorite foods in the world. It's called carob. So when we do a close-up, now there's many different types of carob, and first let me tell you about the carob tree. So the carob tree actually grows in Mediterranean areas, pretty much where citrus would grow, carob could grow. I remember I have fond memories of going to Cyprus, which is in the Mediterranean, and literally picking carob out of the trees. I mean, carob trees would just be grown in downtown areas, and I'd be picking the carob. But that being said, not all types of carob is really tasty, and you want to get the freshest carob, to eat if you're going to eat the whole pods. So what we have today, most people know of carob as the carob that you'll find at the health food store in the bulk section, and you'll see we have some examples right here. So right here, first we have a roasted carob. So this is the carob that's not raw. It definitely has been roasted. So you can see the color difference between the roasted carob and the raw carob. So next we have actually the raw carob that's labeled raw in the health food store, usually in the bulk bins, and this is a pretty fine powder. And so it is labeled raw, although it has been heated, up to around maybe 200 degrees. So from a strict raw foodist point of view, raw carob in the health food store would not be considered raw anymore. Despite it being heated up to 200 degrees, I believe it still has a lot of beneficial nutrients and properties, and I still actually eat it sometimes. So moving on past that, you can see the color difference too, and this stuff's usually a little bit more coarse than the raw carob that's really heated. The really raw carob, on the other hand, you need to usually get from a special place that sells raw food items, and the really raw carob is actually really raw. It's been heated maybe to about 100 degrees, if that, and then they basically pulverize it into the powder. The next best way to eat it actually is maybe crushed carob. So this is basically the whole pods that just been crushed into pieces. The seeds have been taken out already, and these ones are pretty hard and dry, but they're nice and chewy and have a pretty good flavor. The next actually you see on the table, we actually have raw cacao. So raw cacao is not the same as the carob. We have it on here just to show you the difference. So the carob, and so these are the whole carob pods, how whole carob pods look. And so with this, they basically take out the seeds, and then they basically crush it down and make it into little pieces. Or then they take these same pieces, then would, grind it down further and make the really raw, or if they're doing the raw carob that's really heated, they would maybe process the seeds first, usually maybe boiling them or doing something else to bring the temperature up, and then processing that so they could get a finer powder. And also it tastes different. So if you taste the really raw carob versus the just raw carob, definitely a taste difference. And I like the raw carob that's been heated a little bit better than the really raw carob. But best of all, I like the whole pods. So these whole pods are really special. These pods I have here are from California. And I would not consider carob pods a dried fruit. This fruit is hanging on the tree, and yes, it does get dried out a little bit from the sun, but after these are picked, basically, there's no other processing, because these are not put in like, a dehydrator to dry like a fruit would. So just like dates, most people don't consider dates a dried fruit, because, dates are basically harvested and then sold to you. They're not actually put in a dehydrator to get dried out further. Although they do dry, a little bit on the trees, I don't consider them a dried fruit. I would not consider these a dried fruit. Now this kind of crushed carob or any of these powders are definitely, dehydrated, because if you take this fresh carob pod, and these pods are only available, certain times of the year, and they're available now. For example, let me show you how to eat this. Basically what you're going to do is you're going to get an end, and you're going to just bite off the end tip. I usually don't eat that part. You could. And then spit it out. And then what you'll see is inside this carob pod will actually be like white. And if you look at one of these dried ones, it's not quite white. So you want to bite off a little bit at a time, and what you'll see is you'll see the seed in there. You only bite off a little bit at a time, because if you bite into one of those seeds, it'll break your teeth. You can take the seed out. Now the seed is really interesting. The seed is what actually in the olden days, the Egyptians, they would use they would give it to jewelers, and call it a carat. That's why they have carats, because the carob seeds are all consistent weight usually, from what I read. So this is how you would eat the fresh carob. bite off little by little, and you'd actually see it's good color and actually moist. It's not crunchy, it's not hard, it's actually moist. So this is actually called St. John's bread, and that's because St. John the Baptist was basically lived off carob. And comparing, for example, carob to cacao, carob has vitamin A and B. What you could eat basically has 1/3 the calories, so it has much less calories than cacao. Cacao is very high in fat. It can be up to 78% fat or 80% fat, whereas the carob is very, very low. I mean, maybe 1% fat if that. So 80% fat, 1% fat. What's better? We don't want to be eating that much fat in our diets. I mean, you could basically think of these cacao as like nuts, because I mean, they're not the whole food. I'm eating the whole thing except for the seeds when I'm eating the carob, but on the cacao, this is literally just the seed or the nut of the cacao pod. Carob also contains protein, 3 to 4% protein, and there's no stimulants, no theobromine in carob. And with cacao, they have things like theobromine and other things that maybe aren't so healthy for us. Theobromine, if you looked up in the dictionary, it's listed as a poisonous powder. So, I don't think we want to be putting that in our bodies. The other thing is that if you feed cacao to a dog, and you feed, not even that much, it could lose its life because it's toxic to a dog. Now, dogs, on the other hand, they could eat carob. Other animals eat carob. I mean, one of the stories I have is when I was in Cyprus, I went to basically a place where they had camels, and they had little bags selling carob pods for the camels, and it said animal food, and they'd sell it to you so you could feed carob. And the camels, they love carob. Oh my God! But I was like, man, we should be eating the carob, not the camels. So animals don't really eat the cacao beans, the seeds. If you go to like in the tropics where the cacao grows, I don't even see the monkeys eating the seeds. They may eat the fruit and the pith of the cacao, but they won't eat the seeds. They'll actually spit them out because they taste bitter and they taste bad. So if these taste bitter and these taste bad, these taste actually sweet. These have a higher natural occurring sugar content. They're naturally sweet, whereas these are naturally bitter. And the other thing is that carob is alkalinizing. So this will alkalinize your system, make you more alkaline, and we want to be more alkaline. And guess what cacao will do? It'll make you more acid. So, this is carob's free of stimulants. And actually, carob is the next up-and-coming superfood, in my opinion. It contains calcium, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, iron, and also, it's full of antioxidants and polyphenols. It's also really rich in fiber. So cacao has virtually no fiber. It's all fat, and this is really rich in fiber, and we all know most Americans are not eating enough fiber. So we're going to get enough fiber. Also, so want to recommend everybody to eat fresh carob and not cacao. And if you are buying processed carob, of course, the best ones, you want to be eating foods in a whole natural state as possible. So if you can get fresh carob pods, I'd recommend it. This stuff is like eating candy. Definitely good if you have after dinner, sweets, you need a sweet fix. This stuff is sweet, but it's not overly and overtly sweet. It's just nice and sweet. It has a nice fiber, nice chewy taste, especially if you get the fresh stuff that's nice and chewy. That's why they called it St. John's bread. I mean, this reminds me of eating something nice and chewy, kind of like maybe like a bread. That'd be stretching the limit there. But once it gets older and drier, it's really not as good. But when it's nice and chewy, it's actually quite good. You can just eat this instead of candy. Next best would be, of course, the really raw carob powder, and then the raw carob powder that is heat processed at 200 degrees, and then, of course, I wouldn't recommend eating the roasted carob powder. So, this is John Kohler with OKRaw.com, and I hope you've learned something about carob and carob pods today. Oh, I do want to mention these raw carob pods, these fresh raw carob pods are available only for a limited time from rawcarob.com. So once again, if you want these raw carob pods and to try them, I mean, most people, you could rarely get these. They're in season right now. rawcarob.com. You could order those by the pound, and they're so delicious. You got to try at least 1 pound. So this is John Kohler with OKRaw.com, and we'll see you next time.